We have a really good study that we mentioned earlier, the ICFJ study. I talked a little bit about a study of technology in newsrooms and kind of the aptitude or kind of direction that newsrooms are going in terms of adopting new technology. And I think that this particular presentation is definitely worth your read. We also have some folks here from ICFJ who would probably be more than happy to talk to you about it in more detail. Let's raise our hands real quick. There we are, up in the front. So if you have questions about this study, I would definitely recommend checking it out. We also have links to it on our own website at g.co/newstraining, as well as a handful of other studies that are on there as well. I look at a lot of this information to make a determination as to what topics we're going to do training materials on moving forward. So we're really grateful for our partners over at ICFJ for providing some of that data. This study was not just a small study. It was actually a pretty broad study. It did about 12 different languages. It covered about 2,700 plus responses from about 130 different countries. We're actually in a lot of those countries doing trainings ourselves. So I think that this was like a really good insight into where things are at in terms of technology in newsrooms. But I can tell you from having visited about 46 countries myself and thousands of newsrooms, most newsrooms are not thinking about this stuff as deeply and as broadly as they should be. So I think there's an opportunity there. Now, within this particular research paper, thanks again for helping me with my 2018 planning, but this is two different columns here. On the left-hand side was what types of training journalists want, and what type of training on the right-hand side was what newsroom managers were providing. As you can see that those two columns are not similar, right? And I think that your experience is probably pretty similar to this as well. Now, the good news is that I have been building training material on both sides of the column there, and this is something that moving forward we're going to continue to provide resources and training on. Data journalism, we talked about that quite a bit today. Frank, with his one-handed magic up here, walked you through a lot of tips around how to produce content or better understand data journalism as a profession. Cybersecurity is another big piece of this. And what do we mean by cybersecurity? In my impression, what I really look at cybersecurity as is protecting yourself while online, protecting your sources while online or you're communicating online, and protecting your data. And that includes using Google products, but it also is a much broader set of skill sets and things to be thinking about. From this same study, more than half of newsrooms fail to secure their communications at all. Another quick push-pull of the room here. You don't have to raise your hand. How many people have a password or passphrase or code of some sort that locks their mobile device? So if you left your phone on the floor and walked away from it, would somebody be able to pick up your phone and then look through all of your text messages with your significant other and everything else? Yes, something to think about, right? What about encrypting your computer? So that if you leave it in the back seat of an airplane as you were leaving, which you should not be putting your laptop in the back seat of an airplane anyway, but let's say, for example, you mistakenly left your computer someplace, would somebody be able to open that up and access your documents and your information online? So I think what we're finding time and time again is that most newsrooms and journalists, they think of security in their newsroom as something along the lines of this. And this is actually from the Hindustan Times, a photo that was taken after a raid on their servers and on their data, where people like bootjacks literally came into the newsroom, shut them down, and removed data and removed the computers and information from their newsroom. I think this is often the impression that people have in terms of like what they need to be thinking about in terms of security. And this is obviously something that you should be thinking about, like just physical security in your newsrooms and as you're out in the field doing your work. But what we're really talking about here is something along the lines of these examples. Each one of these news articles talks about a particular threat or a particular news organization or government agency or nonprofit or election site that was shut down by a variety of different means. This is not fantasy. This is not, we should probably be thinking about this because this might happen. This is actually happening currently. And what we're seeing is more and more, it's not just happening at a federal level, it's happening at a local level as well. In Colorado, my home state, we're actually seeing some signals that indicate that minor elections or local elections are being tampered with, not by just people fiddling with a voting machine, but state-influenced actors or other hostile actors trying to undermine the electoral process. And this is deeply concerning for me. I think that if you think about who's at risk, for cybersecurity threats. Quick show of hands here, who uses the internet? Okay, so a handful of you are probably at risk, yeah? I think if you are working online in any capacity, this is something that you should be paying attention to and should be thinking about. Again, it's the bicycle helmet or the safety belt. You don't typically think about these things until you're in an accident, and then hopefully you had your safety belt on or your helmet on, and you're thinking about after the fact, I'm so glad that I had that protective device on to prevent me from being more injured, right? If you look at who's at risk here, these are kind of the 10 or so kind of categories of folks that are most at risk for cybersecurity threats. And right up in here are news sites and journalists. And what do we mean by that? Well, here's an example. Quick, again, mentally to yourself, does anyone recognize their password on this list? Hopefully not. Year over year, and this fascinates me, year over year, these are the top 10 most popular passwords used on people's accounts. So if you're using any of these, I would suggest changing it. But it's also just kind of a bit of a cautionary tale. Like, this isn't something that any one individual is, say, like immune to. A lot of people are like, oh, I take care of my security. I have a strong password. Well, if it's a 15-digit character that it's just a string of numbers, it's probably not the most secure password that you can be using. And there's recommendations in terms of like what types of passwords you would want to be thinking about. And in the current environment that we're in, it's not necessarily passwords that we're thinking about, it's passphrases, right? And here's an example, just to be clear, this is not my passphrase, so if you try to log into my account, you're not gonna actually get into it using this. But my friends Tom and Jasmine send me funny emails once a day. That's a particularly difficult passphrase for somebody to divine what that might be. Oftentimes we recommend a combination of letters and numbers and characters, uppercase and lowercase. We also recommend these things, which I usually get a chuckle out of. Go ahead, you can read the first one and chuckle at that right now. Changing your password every 4 months. Most people look at that and they're like, there's no way I'm gonna do that, right? Ensuring all your passwords are unique, which seems simple, but when you have 30, 40 or more websites and sites that you go to, how are you gonna remember all those different passwords? It becomes really complicated. Upper lowercase numbers and special characters are recommended, and then nonsensical words not in the dictionary are recommended. Now, why do we recommend that? Well, first of all, this list right here, this is on a database someplace. It has probably been leaked, and has been probably spread pretty widely on different websites that you, for a couple pennies or even free, can download and use those as part of a computer algorithm to then hack people's accounts. Other things that you can think about in terms of protecting yourself beyond that. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you might encounter out there in the wild in today's cybersecurity landscape. So phishing, malware, and DDoS attacks are the three kind of main threats that we're seeing people's accounts be compromised by. Does anybody know what phishing is? I don't mean like hip waders. Yeah, a handful of you. So phishing we'll get into. What about malware? Does malware sound familiar? Like also potentially described as viruses out there in the wild. What about DDoS attacks? Who's familiar with a DDoS attack? Oddly, it's only this side of the room. Everyone doing okay over here? Okay, all right. We have some tools to help defend against these things. I'm going to talk about each one categorically in a second. We have Advanced Protection Program, which are these advanced protection kits that are on your chair. We'll talk about that in a second. We have a thing called Smart Lock. So when you're trying to remember all of your unique passwords for all of your different websites, Smart Lock is built into Google Chrome. It's a password manager that allows you to both generate complex passwords, but also not have to remember every single one of them. The only password that I actually know by heart, well, it's two. There's one on my phone that allows me to access my phone. The other one is on my laptop, which allows me to open up my laptop computer. Every other password that I have has been generated by SmartLock and has been stored there. So if at any point someone is trying to compromise my account, I have both SmartLock and this other thing called Password Alert listed here. So if somebody tries to type in my password into another website, or if I myself type in my password into the wrong website, it will alert me to that to say, hey, by the way, you typed your password into the wrong website again, dummy, you need to change your password. Project Shield is another tool that protects against DDoS attacks, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Two-step verification is something that you know and something that you have. Something that you know is your password, or your password manager knows your password. Something that you have is a physical security key, which is required in order to access your accounts. Now, I usually get the question about, well, I get a text message to my phone, or I use an authenticator app of some sort in order to access my accounts. Isn't that sufficient enough? And I would say that in most cases it might be. However, if you are targeted for an attack, it's not that much more difficult to be able to compromise your phone or otherwise circumvent where those messages are being sent, so that that passcode now is being sent to some other nefarious person who's trying to log into your account. So we recommend a physical security key. Safe browsing, and then Google Drive and Google Chrome, these are all basic features that are built into Chrome and Drive. There's security features built into each one of our products. And there's a website, which I'll mention in a little bit, that you can go to kind of review all of these things to make sure that you're doing everything that you can to make it difficult or more difficult for people to access your account. So, phishing. What are we talking about when we talk about phishing attempts? Have any of you experienced a scenario with a friend of yours or a relative who has said, hey, my social media network account of choice has been compromised, don't respond to messages that you get to me on XYZ messaging service, or don't click on these links? Does this sound familiar? Yeah, all the time. I love my parents dearly. I get phone calls from them regularly saying that they've been locked out of their account in some way or another. Now, what's happening here is that somebody isn't hacking their account. There's not some person in a basement somewhere with bad lighting and like a dark hoodie trying to physically hack their account. That's not what we're looking at here. What it is they've typed their password and their username into a site that looks awfully similar to a legitimate looking website. That's basically what phishing is, right? You've given your contact information to someone else. Now, if you have two-factor authentication set up, you can give your password out to somebody else. If they don't have that two-factor authentication app or code or key, ideally, it really isn't going to get them that much further, right? This is basically how phishing works. It tricks you into granting unauthorized access to your account to infect your machine, and this is called phishing. If someone steals your password, you can gain unauthorized access to your account, but more importantly, they could gain access to your friends, to your relatives, and they do what's basically called social engineering to find out as much information as possible about you and your colleagues in order to gain access to other information that they might want. There's a really good NPR, it's actually the Gimlet podcast, Reply All. Search for, I don't remember the episode number, but it's like, who the hell would ever get pawned? Or who the hell would ever get phished, I believe. You could fact check me on the actual title. But it's a great 30-minute piece where the folks at Gimlet basically hired a white hat hacker to try to phish their accounts. And sure enough, almost everybody in the newsroom was subject to phishing at one point. So what are we talking about when we actually look into this? So is it just somebody gaining access to your account and then sending nefarious emails from your account? Possibly. It could also be people accessing all of your documents that you stored in your email, other passwords to other accounts, your banking information, your health information. Get text messages. If you've ever gotten the hey sup kind of like text message or like a direct message through social media. So it's a cautionary tale. Don't click on messages from people that you're not aware of who it's coming from. But also, if you get strange text messages or emails or other instant messages from people at strange hours or in ways that you would be a little bit suspicious of, what's happening, and somebody mentioned this earlier, phone spoofing. So another thing that we're seeing is that people's contact lists get compromised, and they get messages or text messages or phone calls from people that they think are people that they know. Right? So it's getting more and more sophisticated. And again, it's not somebody in the basement with a hood on doing this. It's computer algorithms managing a lot of this stuff. A common strategy is linking to a credible-looking login page that tricks you into putting your contact information into that particular page. So it looks really, really authoritative. It looks legit. And if you're not looking closely, if you're not paying attention, like let's say, for example, you're on your phone in the line to get your Starbucks in the morning and flipping through some things, and you say like, oh shoot, suddenly I'm logged out, I need to log back into my account again. That's how these things happen. We're busy, we're distracted, we're wearing too many hats, we're moving too quickly, and we're falling very quickly for these types of things. From there, how to protect yourself from phishing. Be wary of requests for personal information. Don't reply to suspicious emails, instant messages, or pop-up windows that ask for passwords or financial information. Google is never going to reach out to you and ask you for your password or your information through one of these means. And most legitimate companies are not going to do that either. You had a quick question.
Saying, recommending people that I was already friends with as new Facebook
Ah,
friends.
yes. Yep. So we've seen that actually more recently. David Clinch from Storyful actually reshared recently on LinkedIn randomly a warning about this. So we started seeing this happening more and more. Odd one. So we are seeing this coming from different directions. I think the rule of thumb here is anytime something sounds suspicious, similar to that, contact the person via another means. Hey, did you just try to friend me on Facebook? This looks suspicious, right? Or whatever the social media network of choice is. Some sophisticated email or phishing attacks can occur through infected documents and PDF attachments. This is why I recommend Google Drive a lot. Google Drive has built into it security protocols that will scan automatically documents that are under 25 megabytes for known malware and known viruses. I also know some folks, some of them are in the room, that do not click on documents or links in emails at all. They just will not use them, right? They'll wait for some other means in order to access that information. And I don't know that that's necessarily being too paranoid. I think that's just being very aware and cautious of kind of the environment that we're working in today. Never click on questionable links. Always double check the URL to make sure you're entering data into a legitimate website or app. So this goes both for social media. Don't click on that random person from whatever country saying that they want to be friends with you and like they're really awesome and you have a lot in common. Don't click on that. Perhaps like check into it a little bit more. Check the URLs. Do they look legitimate before you start entering information into that site? Watch out for impersonators requesting money, claiming to be stranded in a foreign country or saying their phone is stolen and can't be called. You may have seen something like this before. This was like the old Nigerian money scam that was going around like about 6 or 7 years ago. It has permutated and changed since then, but it's like, hey, I've got $1 billion. I just need to deposit into your account. You could take some of it. You just have to send it back. There's Western Union and 5 different hoops that you got to go jump through. And by the way, you've won the lottery and I'm a crown prince of wherever, right? You've probably seen something like this, right? Those seem more obvious, but they can also just be something as simple as, hey, I'm your cousin or your sister or whatever, and I'm stranded in wherever, can you Western Union me some information? Click on this link, right? Or did you just text me, click on this link over here? Like we see that coming through in a lot of different forms. If you could receive an account security notification from Google, or for that matter, from any platform or from any social media account, instead of clicking on that link in an email or in the message, what I would recommend doing in terms of Google specifically, go to security.google.com. Anytime I get a link from anybody, I don't click on it. I look at the URL, I double check to make sure that it's legit, and then I'll go to that particular website and manually go through the process of finding that site and that link in order to check and make sure that my password or my security is taken care of. Does this look familiar to you? Anybody see an email that looks like something like, I'm sorry, go ahead. I do use tinyURL. I use short link codes, but usually for sites that I'm familiar with. So if it's like if it's a presentation, I actually have bit.ly links in this one in particular. Typically, I'll use those if I know that it's from a credible and legitimate source. If it's some random link that I found on the web, I typically won't do that. I typically won't use those. I'll try to reach out to that person and say, can you give me the direct link for that particular site or that particular resource. I am a higher security risk than most people, though, so I have slightly more stringent limitations into what I will or will not do. A lot of this discussion is about risk profile, right? What type of worker are you? What type of journalist are you? How do you experience the web? To what degree are you comfortable putting yourself at risk to use those types of links or to download different types of material? This particular email came from, this was actually, Frank, you had some context to this one. This was Adrian Chen from the AP actually received this. Is this right? As a New Yorker. The New Yorker? Adrian Chen did the original Silk Road reporting. Got it. So, this particular email may have looked like it came from Adrian Chen. Does anybody see anything about this message other than the redaction that might flag as potentially being duped or otherwise being illegitimate? Yeah.
Usually when you try and sign in from another machine, I sometimes get emails like that when I sign in from a machine that it's not expecting me.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll say, it'll say at the bottom, if this was you, then don't worry, no action is required.
Right.
But it doesn't usually want me to go and click links or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. Anything else in this email look odd to you or out of place? Yeah.
I've got like these emails a lot often before because like I switch technologies a lot, and I know that the word hijacker isn't used in the
Yeah. So that's a good one, yeah. So just the vocabulary that's being used, like hijacker, that's kind of odd. Anything else?
They don't prevent you from signing in when you sign in. I've never been prevented from signing in
Yeah.
on no machine. I just get an email that says somebody signed in from an unfamiliar machine.
Exactly. What else? Does this look odd to you? Right where my mouse is? Yeah, no photo over here. What about this logo? Does anybody remember like early 2000s? This logo is a little bit out of date. Things like that. This URL down here too, it's coming from a Tor proxy, readme arachnid like this is a little bit sketchy. Also, it's coming from France. So, there's a lot of cute clues into here that would indicate to me that perhaps there's things I should be thinking about. Perhaps I don't want to click on this particular link. But again, you're busy, you're overworked, you're overstressed, you're in the line waiting for your food, or whatever it is that you're doing where you're distracted, you're not paying attention to all of the details here. But again, just wanted to flag some of these things for you. How do you protect against phishing attacks? Advanced Protection Program, if you are a journalist or working in a newsroom, particularly if you're covering things like elections or organized crime, or if you have received requests like this in the past. Advanced Protection is a really good program to subscribe to. It provides you, and actually, my little product demo here. These are sealed. I'm not going to open this one in case somebody actually wants it, but inside here are two different security keys. One of them is Bluetooth, and the other one is a USB key that plugs into your computer. And really what this does is anytime you sign into your account from a new computer or from a new device, it's going to request that you use this two-factor key in order to log in. If you're not regularly logging into random computers, which you probably shouldn't be doing anyway. By the way, who here goes and uses a computer in a hotel, like the public computer, and logs into their account? A handful of you? I cannot tell you the number of times where I have seen somebody else's account still logged in on a computer that's publicly accessible. We forget to log out of these things from time to time. So good rule of thumb, just don't use those computers in general, but also making sure that if you are using them, you're logging out and using two-factor authentication. But this program also creates a few other steps beyond just two-factor authentication. So for those people that are particularly at risk, it has more stringent controls over downloads and other files that you might be loading onto your computer. It makes it a little bit more difficult for third-party apps that might be accessing your data to be able to be used. So if you're using a lot of third-party apps, you might be a little bit restricted in that way. And there's a handful of other tools that are available here, including blocking fraudulent access to your account. So you might get a couple of those warnings from time to time saying that somebody in like Russia or Canada has tried to access your account. This shows up for me quite a bit because I almost always am using a VPN or a virtual private network because I spend most of my life on public Wi-Fi. So in most cases, as I mentioned earlier this morning, you came into Google Guest Wi-Fi, no password, right? I can guarantee you that Google's password or account is secure here. But in most cases, if you go to a hotel or an airport or some random public Wi-Fi, how do you know whether or not you're actually signing into Denver International Airport Wi-Fi or just a Wi-Fi network that somebody created and called Denver International Airport Wi-Fi, and then is scraping and collecting your information from there? So it makes it a little bit more difficult to log into some of these accounts, but it also protects you from people being able to access your information that way. Safe browsing is another thing that's built into Google Chrome. So if you accidentally navigate to a website that's known to contain malware or known to be nefarious in some way, it'll signal to you to that. It'll say, hey, you've navigated to this website, you should navigate back again. Back to safety is usually what it says. Two-step verification are those little keys that I gave you that are lying on your chairs. If you didn't get one, I'm happy to hand one out to you. But what that allows you to do is basically like one part of this advanced protection kit. It's basic two-factor authentication. It's, as I said before, it's something that you know and something that you have. I find that to be way more secure than passcodes that you get text messaged to you or using an authenticator app. I usually just have one on my key ring, or I have an extra one back at my desk stored in a locked box. So in case I need access to my accounts, I have that. I mentioned Smart Lock, which saves your passwords, and then Password Alert, which alerts you to whether or not you've added in your password and information to another account. We talked a little bit about two-step verification here. The process of getting signed up for two-factor authentication is relatively easy. And the steps that you take is basically after you enter your password, you'll be asked for either a one-time code sent to your phone or a voice call generated through a mobile app, or if you have that security key, which is more secure than those other two, you'll have to put that into your device to be able to access your account. To enable two-step verification, you go to security.google.com. You click where it says two-step verification. It takes like about 4 or 5 minutes. Before you leave today, if you would like to get set up for two-factor authentication, I will hold your hand through the process of getting set up with it if you are at all confused or not sure about how to actually go about doing it. I never do that with any of our other products, but I will walk you through that because I think it's that important. You confirm your phone number, you enter the code sent to verify your number, and then you turn on two-factor authentication, and then you're pretty much good to go. There's alternative options that you can access it to. So there's an Authenticator app that you can download. I find that to be pretty simple to use. On a lot of my other accounts, I have that set up for that. And if you don't want to use a code at all, you can register one of those security keys, and that's really the one that we really recommend more than anything. So for most users, two-factor authentication with the security key is probably fine. If you're at particular risk, advanced protection is probably the better way to go. So what is advanced protection? I talked about that a little bit ago. There's a nice little video here, which I'm not going to bother to go through, but I will share that with you afterwards. It's basically just a promo video that talks about the product, and it pretty much goes over exactly what I just said, but with nice music behind it. This looks something pretty similar to what you might see. So this is the kind of, well, first of all, this is kind of an alert that I might have gotten from my own account. Because again, if I'm using a VPN, it's basically masking my internet traffic and making it look as if like I'm in a different country when I'm surfing the web or when I'm accessing, say, like banking documents and things like that online. Someone has just used your password to try to sign in your Google account, and this is the name of the Google account, and the information about where it came from, the location, the IP address. This particular thing where it says change password, if you get this alert, I would go one step further and actually go to security.google.com to change your password, not click on any of these links. Because again, they're becoming more and more sophisticated. While this logo is legit, and while mostly this email looks pretty legit overall, I would still be a little bit concerned, a little bit paranoid about whether or not this was a legit email. So security.google.com, go and then change your password from there. And then it's going to request that two-step verification in order to get into your account. I mentioned a little bit about advanced protection. It's the strongest defense against phishing. It protects your data from malicious and insecure applications. By the way, just quick question. How many of you have an app on your phone or on your computer that you haven't touched in, say, like, I don't know, 6 months or so? Yeah. So if you have all of these apps on your phone that are just kind of like lurking there and sitting there, it's probably in your best interest to remove those. It's not that hard to re-download them again if you really get the urge to use that app at some point in the future. But what you end up exposing yourself to by leaving some of these apps on your devices is if you're not updating your phone and device regularly, or if you're not updating your computer regularly, or if you're not reading the... Who here reads the terms of service when they download an app onto their device? Yeah. So are you sure how much information you're allowing these apps to use? Do you know whether or not they're tracking your location? Do you know how much information you're giving them access to? So while this sounds a little bit kind of conspiratorial and maybe like tinfoil hat-like, I would say these are really good basic practices just to like limit your overall risk, right? It's all about just controlling the environment that you're working in. So it makes it harder for malicious and insecure applications to access your account. It has stronger vetting against fraudulent account recovery requests, and it has those deep scanning of incoming documents that I mentioned earlier. To enroll in advanced protection, it's super, super easy. The first thing is you need to get security keys. By the way, that's what these are. So you have these. That's my Oprah moment. You can take these with you and use them. So it's roughly about $40 to buy these online. If you are interested in using these, or if you have other folks in your newsroom that wants them, I will give them to you for free. Just let me know. We will send them to your newsroom. So you don't have to worry about paying for them. You go to g.co/advanced protection, and it'll walk you through the basic steps. It requires 2 security keys to get started. They're both in here. The whole process takes about 5 minutes. When I was at IRE a few months back, I actually did this live in person for folks, and then immediately lost one of the security keys underneath the podium, which was a fun little moment where I had to then go fishing for the key. So just make sure you have them in your hands. I have one on my key ring, and like I mentioned before, I have another one in my drawer in my desk at home.
What happens if you lose them? Like, you're someone who loses your keys.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we've got a good workaround for you in that case, too. So with advanced protection, there's a phone number that you can call. So if you get locked out of your account, it'll actually walk you through it. But the chances of you losing both keys are pretty rare, I would say. Like, there's 2 keys, yeah.
Also, do you guys collect the information? So
Nope.
giving it to us.
Yeah, the question was as far as like, collection of information. The only thing that we're recording is how many of these we gave out. We're not tracking any one individual. We're not really, we have no means in being able to determine who individually is registering that key based on the ones that we handed out. Really, this is more of just like a goodwill effort to try to make sure that if you're using Google products, you're using them as securely as possible. You can use Google products without these if you want, but I think this is just a much more secure way of going about doing things. Password alert. So this one is I'm a big fan of this one. g.co/password alert. You can actually sign up and download that right now if you wanted to. It's a Chrome extension. It lives right in your Chrome browser, and you never really have to pay attention to it unless you're looking to make a new password for a new account, or if you need to access a password for one of your existing accounts. And what it does is it actually stores a fingerprint of what your password looks like in its database there. We're not actually able to see the actual password itself. It's what's called a hashed password, and if you want more information on that, you can look up what that actually means. We don't have time to get into that right now, but essentially it's like the equivalent of a fingerprint. And it says, yep, this looks authoritative, this looks like the right type of password, and it will then enter that password as a row of dots that you can't see into your account and let you log in. This is really helpful if you spend any time in airports or in public places. One of the ways that people gain access to people's accounts is like literally watching them as they type in their passwords, or if they have what's called a keylogger on your computer. So let's say in a worst case scenario, you clicked on a nefarious link, it downloaded a piece of software onto your computer. Now you have this piece of software on your computer that's reading all of the typing that you're doing and actually recording your key logging, your keystrokes. That's potentially another way that people can gain access to your account. Password alert's always on. Once it's installed in Chrome, you don't really need to do anything else. But anytime you need to go to a website to log in, you can access your passwords through that means. And if you ever forget any of your passwords, you can get back into Password Manager through Password Alert. You have to type in your computer's password in order to be able to access that. But with a couple quick steps, it gives you access to what those passwords are, so you can copy paste them in if you need to. There's a whole step-by-step here that goes into it. It's basically the equivalent of going to g.co/password alert, selecting Add to Chrome, and then you sign into your Google account again to actually get started with it. And that's pretty much it. It's pretty simple. Now, I often get the question around this period in time in my presentation of like, well, what about all these other third-party password managers or password saving accounts and things like that? To me, this goes back to this idea of risk. Like, how much information are you comfortable with being out there with different companies? My entire life is Google. I get paid by Google. Google pays my rent. Google feeds me. It has most of my data, and I'm quite comfortable with that because we spend millions and millions and millions of dollars every year to make sure that your accounts are as secure as possible. So for me, I'm very comfortable giving access to my password management to Google through Password Alert. You can use other third-party companies, but I would be very careful about that, and I would be answering the question to yourself of, am I comfortable with them having access to my information? If you can't answer that with like a unanimous like yes, hell yes, I might look at other options, right? And there's a lot of different options that are out there. Smart lock. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just mentioning Password Alert. Password Alert's actually the website that notifies you if you type in the wrong password into the wrong site. I'm sorry, it's too late in the day, and I'm actually tired now. Smart Lock is the other one, the password manager that I was actually referring to. So everything I just talked about a minute ago is actually Smart Lock. Password Alert is just a little notification that says, hey, by the way, you typed your password into the wrong website. Both of those together provides a really, really powerful option to both manage and store your passwords and also make sure that if you do screw up and type your password into the wrong website, you've been notified of those. Apologies, that was actually my mistake. With Smart Lock, what it actually does is it works across multiple different devices. So if you have a smartphone, if you have a smart watch in your computer, it'll actually work across all of those things. I'm always really delighted whenever I need to log back into like Southwest Airlines app or whatever. Whenever I update it or whenever I change maybe or add a new app, and Google remembers my passcode from when I logged in on a desktop, and then will log me into the actual app on my phone if you have an Android device. Hours of life saved right there. So definitely worth checking that one out again. And to get to that particular one, it's g.co/smartlock. I mentioned a little bit about malicious software in Google Drive. Built into Google Drive automatically is like scanning for documents of under 25 megabytes in size. This is, I think, tied to another question that I get quite a bit around, if we're using Google Drive or Google Docs, how do I make sure that my information that I'm sharing with other people is secure? How do I limit who has access to what documents? And we'll get into that in just a little bit. But in general, again, this is kind of around the kind of concept of like, who do you trust with your information? I'm very trusting of Google in terms of sharing documents and putting stuff online, but I wouldn't necessarily put anything that I wouldn't be comfortable with potentially with somebody gaining access to in some point in the near future on another website necessarily. So I don't use things like Dropbox. I don't use these other third-party profiles or platforms to store my information. I'm also really, really careful about accessing, say, like personal health documentation or banking information on things like public Wi-Fi or other places. Like I usually wait until I'm home to do all of that stuff because both my router and my Wi-Fi at home is locked down, and I'm also using Google's tools to help secure that stuff as well. Safe browsing is really just a little thing that'll pop up. It looks like something like this. So if you navigate accidentally to a site, and this happens pretty randomly sometimes, if you just type in the wrong string of characters into the URL, there's a lot of websites that are maybe like one character off from a legitimate website that you think you're actually entering in the right URL, but maybe you used an I instead of an L, or maybe you just like typed J instead of H because it's really close on the keyboard. There's a lot of third-party sites that have basically parked their site using that URL and then use that as a means for phishing your account. So you'll oftentimes get a warning here that says, by the way, you've navigated to a deceptive site, go back to safety or start over again. And this works in Mozilla, Firefox, Chrome, and Safari. If you go to g.co/safe browsing, it'll talk a little bit more about that and kind of how all that works, but definitely something to check out there as well. So for those of you that aren't really aware of DDoS attacks and what Project Shield is, actually, Frank, you had a really good analogy a couple weeks ago when you were talking about that. What was that? Oh, it was the party. You used the party analogy. So in high school, you're like, hey, I'm gonna have a party at my parents' house. We're gonna invite like 5 or 10 friends over, and then like 300 people show up and then trash your house. None of you have experienced that, I'm sure. But that's essentially what a DDoS attack is. You have a server that you've paid for a certain amount of space for. A DDoS attack takes multiple different computers and directs traffic to this particular server or to a website, effectively shutting it down by having way too much information thrown at it all in one time. And we're seeing a lot of news organizations and nonprofits and other election-related sites being shut down in this fashion using what's called digital denial of service attack. This is something that's, there's a nice little video here, which I think if we have audio, I'll see if I can play this here for you. And actually, I don't. Is my AV guy back there? He is not. We've lost our AV. We'll come back around to that in a little bit, and I'll show you that video if we actually get access to that audio, because I think it's worth kind of getting an idea of like what DDoS is. But if you go to the Jigsaw's website, you look for Project Shield, there's a little video that'll walk you through this. But what we've seen is that there's been a lot of digital denial of service attacks against like news organizations like the BBC, groups like Twitter and Spotify and other sites have been subject to outages. Newsweek was actually subject to this not too long ago, and there's a lot of other websites that have been subject to this. It doesn't cost a ton of money to actually do this. For roughly about $5, you can request a digital denial of service attack and shut down a website. So what we're actually seeing is new kind of ways that different organizations are trying to shut down free speech, shut down communication, particularly around topics or subjects that they're not particularly in favor of. Project Shield actually has a handful of features built into it. So if you have a nonprofit, government-oriented site or a news-oriented site, you can use Google's infrastructure to protect that site from DDoS attacks. We have an amazing infrastructure and amazing support to protect our own properties from that kind of a thing. It's free for newsrooms. It has customizable caching as well. So because we have servers all over the place, you can actually cache portions of your website to make them load more quickly in those regions. And there's additional features. Essentially, it doesn't require a ton of maintenance for you. There's dedicated product support, and there's real-time site analytics as well. So this is just another way that we're working with the industry to try to protect these really critical sites, especially in times of need like elections or around midterms, for example. You can find out more about Project Shield at g.co/shield. If you're not 100% sure if your newsroom or your organization is protected against these types of things, I would grab your IT person or team, have them review some of these materials with them, and if you ever have questions, you can have them reach out to newslabsupport@google.com, and we'll happily put you in touch with the Jigsaw team to walk you through what you need to do in order to protect your own sites from these types of things. The last thing that I would mention would also be this thing called Outline. Virtual private networks, basically a tunnel through the web to kind of protect people, your data from people that might be trying to look through it. Roughly 2 out of every 3 internet users lives in a country where the internet is not free and access to news and information is not guaranteed. So not so much folks within this room necessarily have to worry about that, but it provides you an opportunity to shield your internet traffic and to shield the stuff that you're doing online from people that might be trying to circumvent that. There's a lot of different VPNs that are out there by a lot of different companies, but again, it goes back to that same question. Who owns the VPN? What are they doing with your data? How do they access that? Are you comfortable with them using your data in some different ways? In some cases, a lot of these VPNs don't even encrypt traffic that you're experiencing. And about 80% of them access some sort of personal data. 84% of them don't actually protect any kind of traffic at all. So we worked with Jigsaw to create a VPN service called Outline, which we're specifically providing for journalists and newsrooms. Back to that study again that we were talking about earlier, of about half or so of journalists and newsrooms don't really secure their information in any way whatsoever. This is just another tool in the toolbox to help you protect not only your passwords and things like that, like we were mentioning earlier, but even just the browsing activity and the traffic that you're experiencing online. So if you're doing investigative reporting on organized crime, if you're covering elections, if you're covering any topic that might be of sensitive nature, it could be a good idea to take advantage of something like a virtual private network to help secure your data while online. There's a few other features built in within Outline. You can actually create and operate your own VPN on a private server. So if you're really security conscious, you can actually set up your own server and protect that information using Outline through that means. You can basically have your own VPN in that way. And then you have strong encryption that helps keep your communications private. We don't log your web traffic. We're not sharing that with third-party sources. And it's completely open source. So we actually worked with Radically Open Security to build this. The benefits of open source technology is that there's a lot of eyeballs on it, and it's always being updated and corrected for any bugs or anomalies that might pop up there. So it's not necessarily a specific Google product. It's actually an open source effort that's being put into play here. Some other things that you can think about, and we have, I think, are our folks from the DHS here? Oh, sweet, perfect. So I've got them coming up. They've got a tip sheet, which we just handed out. They've got some other tips that we're gonna potentially talk about in a second here. I've got a few of these that might actually be pretty similar, but you know, using unique passwords for each account. Remember, Smart Lock will help you get into that more easily. Using those strong passphrases as opposed to passwords is another good tip. Using a password manager of some sort, using two-step verification, checking your account. If you go to g.co/security-checkup, this is a perfect website to walk through to make sure that you're taking all the steps that you can to make sure that you're protecting yourself and your data and your sources online. It takes about 5 or 10 minutes to go through that entire site, but I think it's really worth taking the time to go through that. There's also a lot of other services that provide security and privacy. So I would take the time, I usually do this about once a quarter. It's the same period of time that I go through and change all my passwords for my websites. I go to each social media account that I have, I go to each bank account that I have, I go to each website where I have a profile, and I double check to see what the security settings are. Have I gone through that? Have I double checked to make sure everything's okay? I put it in my calendar as a quarterly reminder, so I actually sit down and do it. I basically book myself an hour to do that once a quarter, and that saves me hundreds of hours later down the road where if somebody compromises my identity or compromises my accounts, I don't have to suddenly like panic and try to figure out how to actually do some of this stuff. Other tips that you can think about, and this goes to some of those questions that I was asking you earlier. Install software updates whenever you receive a trusted notification. Who has a phone or a computer right now that is waiting in the bottom right-hand corner or somewhere that says, hey, you have a software update. Do you want to do this now or later? Yeah. If you have one of those, the reason that they send those out is a lot of times those are security patches. So they found a compromised piece of code. They've sent out some sort of a patch which allows you then to update that particular app or software. That's also the same reason why I recommend removing old apps and software from your computers and your devices that you're not using on a regular basis. Check to make sure you're running the latest version of via the App Store or enabling auto updates as well. That also just makes your life that much easier. In terms of mobile security, locking your screen with a passcode or fingerprint lock is highly, highly recommended. Again, if you lose your phone, you drop it under a seat, or you just leave it behind someplace, making it that much more difficult for people to be able to access your account using a passphrase or a passcode, you'd be surprised how quickly you learn how to add those in, or even if you have a device that allows you to use a fingerprint lock, it just becomes part of the process of gaining access to your account. It doesn't take that much time. Protect your data by reviewing and editing information each app has access to in the device settings. So everybody chuckled when I asked them if you read the terms of service when you download apps. People ask me this all the time. Do you actually read the terms of service when you download new software? Yes, I do. I do, because I'm concerned about what information they're sharing, what access information that they have, and I want to make sure that I am well informed about what my security risk is. If you're not comfortable reading the terms of service of an app, why are you downloading the app in the first place? That's my question that I would ask to you. Delete apps you don't use and enable device encryption would be the last two bits on mobile reporting. And then the last bit in terms of using Google Drive and Docs and these other Google products, some things that I would check for. When you're managing permissions of your documents on Google Drive, check who has access to that document. So a lot of times people ask me, can I get access to the deck or the presentation that you just gave at XYZ event? And I don't share those as a Google Drive folder or a Google document of some sort. I'll usually download those as a PDF, or I'll just create a roll-up of URLs and then share those on social media, because I just don't want that many people accessing my files that I don't know who actually has access to them. Yeah?
If you want to completely delete an app off your phone, you know how sometimes you go back and you want it back again? You go back and get it and it's still there and all your stuff, and you just download it again really quickly?
Like in your auto updates, you mean, kind of thing?
Well, it's like you can take Facebook off your phone,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still kind of there in your app store, and it's really easy to get it back.
Oh, got it, yeah.
How do you completely break up with an app?
That is a really good question. I think it's different for Android versus iPhone. I know on Android, like it'll have a record of apps that you've downloaded in the past, and in some cases you can go into like the history, download history, and kind of get rid of those. I'd have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. You know, with Android, at least for me, I have removed apps off of my device, and as long as I've removed them and deleted it, instead of just like kind of moving it off my home screen, it's gone. So if you're having a different experience, maybe we should like sync up offline, and I can walk you through that. So basic questions that I would be asking myself before I share documents with somebody. Who has access to it? What rights do they have? This happens a lot. This has happened to me on more than one occasion, actually, myself. You share a document with somebody, maybe it's a Google Doc, a presentation, a spreadsheet, and you gave them edit access to that document, and then 2 weeks later you go back and the document's changed. And you're like, oh shoot, what happened? And then you realize you can go back into revision history and see like, oh, such and such had access to it and they didn't realize it and they moved a bunch of cells around and nothing's working the way that I want it to. So you can change edit access. You can give people just view access. You can give them comment access, which is really great because they can highlight things and add comments. So if you're working on a collaborative document, I do this with my manager quite a bit. I'll share a document with him. I won't give him edit privileges, but I'll give him comment privileges so they can add in suggestions and comments, and then I can go back and clean those up later. How long do you want to give them access to that document for? So in some apps, you can actually monitor the duration of time that you're actually giving somebody access to that particular document. And then what are your own owner settings? Like what kind of control do you have over those documents? These are all things that I would be asking myself before sharing things more broadly. And then lastly, securityplanner.org.